offerings available. And on that note, I'm going to touch a little bit on help sites and the product info before we jump into the webinar itself. So I do want to remind everyone, up at the top here, we have this little question mark, and that's allowing you to access the training area, contact support, and also do some feature request work. So the training area is very, very useful. Sometimes I find out people are unaware of this existing, and it's too bad because it's a great library of information. And I really do recommend going down into the FP library as a good place to start off. And this is an area where you have all the different documentation and videos and everything organized by the modules of the system. So it's a really good program, and it's easy to search here too. So if we wanted to see something related to like adding staff expenses, it's a common question. Search that, and there we have a document right here on staff expenses. So there's good search functionality. I do recommend checking it out. And then the next thing that I want to show is the feature requests area. So if you select feature requests, you are able to submit a request into our product team. Please do know that these don't just disappear. We don't burn them up or anything like that. We do look at them very closely, and we monitor this, and we take them very seriously. We take all the input that we're getting, and it really drives the product roadmap. So I do encourage everybody to use this. And I know that our product team is looking at ways of bringing this more to the forefront, so that after you submit something, you're not just wondering whatever happened with it. That we're looking for ways to get everybody involved a bit more and see more of what's going on with these requests. So look out for that in the not too distant future. Okay. So without further ado, let's jump in. Jeremy, anything I missed before we should get started here?
No, you've covered everything.
Okay, great. So let's get started. So I have a demonstration version of Function Point open here. I might even zoom in a little bit because it's looking a little bit small to me. Oh, actually, you know what? I have to remind myself, that I'm on a Mac, and so my controls aren't the same. There we go. Okay, well, so much for zooming in. So I apologize if it's a little bit small on everyone else's side. In fact, maybe I'll try one more thing. I'm going to try Control Plus. There we go. All right, that's what I wanted. All right, so I have a function point system open here, and then I also have QuickBooks open up in the background. Now, as far as setting up the QuickBooks integration, this is something that you should be provided with information on, when you're deploying Function Point. But it's really straightforward. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to open up a browser. You're going to type in qb.functionpoint.com. When you go to qb.functionpoint.com, you're going to see a link here where you can download the desktop integration file. And when you select this, it's going to download what we call fp.Accountant version 2. So once you download that, you're going to get this program here. So fp.Accountant version 2. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is set up your FP credentials. This is also pretty straightforward. You can usually figure this out pretty easily. The FP URL is what you see as the URL for your system. So in this case, it's helium.functionpoint.com. Most likely everyone that's on this call is also helium.functionpoint.com. Unless you're in another part of the world, we have different servers in different parts of the world, and they're all named after elements. So you might be on gold.functionpoint.com or lithium.functionpoint.com, but most likely you're on helium. So you're going to be putting that URL here. The company is the company name that you use to log into your Function Point system. So ABC agency, it has to be identical, so spaces and things like that. So that is the company name you use to log into your system, and then the username and the password that you use to log in, and you do need to make sure that you have full access in your Function Point system. You don't want to be having any missing permissions allowing you to, or not allowing you to see accounting integration. So once we have that all in there, we'll save that. And then what we need to do from there, and actually, Jeremy, in case I'm getting this backwards, what I was about to take a look at is the QB file path. Or do we run the full sync first or the QB file path? Can you remind me?
The QB file path would be first, and then the syncing. Now, I do want to kind of touch on one thing there, Mark. With the URL being at the top, it's anything before the FPX is what you need to have in the credentials. You don't need the rest of it saying FPX, HTML, app, main, home. I've just seen it in the past where clients copy the whole thing and try to paste that in as the URL for the integration. It's everything before the last slash.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for pointing that out. You know, it's funny because I was thinking that and I didn't even say it, so I appreciate you pointing that out. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to go into admin and we need to go into integrate accounting and set up QuickBooks integration. So we go into set up QuickBooks integration. Actually, my apologies. We need to go into set up QuickBooks file path. So that is your first step after downloading fp.Accountant version 2 and then putting in the credentials. So you're going to set up QuickBooks file path. Now this file path is the file path of the QuickBooks company file on your computer. So if we take a look at our desktop here on this computer, and I am running Parallels on a Mac. So I'm using a Mac, but I have a Windows virtual machine that allows me to run QuickBooks desktop, which we can integrate with. Now notice that I have a QuickBooks desktop icon. You do not want the file location of the QuickBooks desktop icon. You want the file location of the actual QuickBooks company file. And to find that, it's really easy. All you need to do is open up QuickBooks, and then if you are using a PC, hit F2. If you're using a Mac, hold Function and press F2. That's going to open up this window, and here you're going to see the file location. Now, if you happen to know the file location of the QB company file, on mine it actually happens to be on my desktop. So if we were to close this and we look at it right here, here is the QB company file. But in most cases, it's not there. It's hidden somewhere deep, in the abyss of your computer, and people choose the desktop icon. So if you don't know where it is, open up QuickBooks, Function F2 on a Mac, or just see here. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my bad. Function F2 on a Mac or just F2 on a PC, and then you'll find the file location. So we're copying that and putting it into function point under the set QuickBooks file path. And again, that is under admin, integrate accounting, set QuickBooks file path, and there we're dropping that file path. And then just hit save. You don't need to reset the QB integration because you're setting it up, so just hit save. So once you've done that, you've set up the FP credentials in fp.Accountant, you've set the QuickBooks file path in function point. So those are the two things that are going to connect the systems. You then need to open up fp.Accountant, select integration, and then select full sync. And notice it says run only if requested by FP employee. When you run a full sync, it connects the two systems going through your entire QuickBooks company file and looking for any corresponding information in function point. Now for me, and I'm not going to do this live because it's already set up and good to go, but for me that would probably take about 3-4 minutes, but it could take much because my QuickBooks company file is almost empty. It could take significantly longer if you've been using that QuickBooks company file for a long time. So an hour, 4 hours, 7 hours, it could take a while. So the best thing to do is select that at the end of the day, or maybe right before you go to lunch or something like that. Let it do its thing, come back to it in a while, and you'll be able to see if it's done. You'll see this message, OK, complete, if it's done. If not, you'll see it going through records, and you'll see numbers moving up top here just to let you know. So again, that could take a while. So just make sure that, and you also can't be messing around with QuickBooks while that's running. You can't be going in and changing anything or doing any work. So you're going to want to set that and then leave. Set it and forget it, like that old weird infomercial with the ovens. So once that is done, you will then be able to go ahead and set up the QuickBooks integration. Now this is where QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online cross. From here on, they're pretty much identical. The process for setting up QuickBooks Online prior to this, I would say, is actually probably easier. It's just you just follow a couple steps that are prompted on screen. Again, we have a video that shows exactly how to do it. It's only a couple minutes long. It's really, really simple. So we'll be sending that out after the webinar. Again, I just want to stress it's really, really simple, really basic, works really well. And then you will get to this stage that we are at now, and then the process moving forward will be pretty much exactly the same. So what you need to do to set up this QuickBooks integration, and going through this will help you to understand exactly how it's working and to make sure that everything is set up correctly, is you need to go through this tab by tab and make sure that everything is linked. So we'll start off with the general tab. This is asking us for expenses and POs. Do we want to use a PO number, a reference number, or a combination of the two? And this combination of the two is what we highly recommend. So please don't make any adjustments to this. You should really be using the reference number, which is an invoice number from the vendor, plus the PO number. That is going to ensure that you never get any duplicates or any possibility of a duplicate. So please do keep that the same. And then you're going to want to keep the job name number format as well. This deposit item is related to deposit invoices. So this deposit item is coming from QuickBooks. The deposit item is mapped to a current liability account in QuickBooks, meaning that any deposit you do in Function Point and sync over will be going into that current liability account and will be considered unearned revenue. Odds are this will automatically map to this single deposit item you have in your system. If you have multiple, then you'd want to select the appropriate one. You then have the option to sync with classes, and I'm actually going to deselect that for now because I want to come back to it a little bit later. We're going to touch on this and take a look at it, and then total line items you don't have to worry about. So from there, we're really just going through the tabs. So accounts receivable should be mapped to your accounts receivable account. If it's named something different, you may need to do that yourself. Accounts payable, mapped to the accounts payable account. Service groups relate to classes. We're going to touch on those in a minute. The services is a list of your Function Point services. Now, if you're brand new to the system, you're going to have our default services. And they'll look something similar to what we have here, maybe a little bit different. Mine is actually really simple. There's not too many of them. But here we have the Function Point internal services. And these need to be mapped to QuickBooks income items. This is one of the most important aspects of the integration, mapping your Function Point internal services to your QuickBooks income items. And the income items that you see here, I want to show where they're coming from before we talk about the mapping of them. So in QuickBooks, what it is not coming from is your chart of accounts. It's coming from your item list. And they're being mapped to income items. Those income items are mapped to the accounts. You'll notice here that I have a bunch that are have been deleted or made inactive because we do some testing with the system, but you'll see the active ones here, account service, copywriting, and so forth. But it is these items that are mapping to your Function Point services, not the accounts themselves. It's the income items. And in any case where you have a one-to-one match, so notice I have account service as a Function Point service, and I have account service as a QB income item, therefore it's mapped automatically. Administrative is a Function Point service, but I do not have a corresponding income item called administrative. So I need to choose something else. So in this case, I'd say I'd probably choose account service. So this is going to go over into QuickBooks as account service because I do not have a corresponding income item that is an exact match. And then same with digital. So if we look at digital, then I'm not seeing an exact match, so I'm going to choose web development. And I'm just going through, and anywhere where I see select QB income item, I'm just choosing something that is the best match that I want. What this allows you to do is have an income item structure in QuickBooks that can be as robust or as simple as you want. You could have 2 or 3 main income items, overall categories, and that could be mapped to a very detailed and robust Function Point service list. So those are the options that you have there. Jeremy, any questions or comments that you think we should make at this time?
Nothing at this point. There's a couple questions just about, do I need to have parallels to have this work on a Mac? And the answer was yes. And then just a couple setup questions that I'm just dealing with offline.
Okay, sounds good. The thing with QuickBooks for Mac is that unfortunately Intuit doesn't really support QuickBooks for Mac as much as companies like ourselves, we are a Mac company, a lot of our clients are, would like. So it limits the ability to create an integration with it. You can export data from systems like Function Point and import it into QuickBooks for Mac, which is something that we can accommodate, but it's not an integration, and it's just based on the fact that unfortunately Intuit doesn't offer that ability for the QuickBooks for Mac product. And I haven't Googled that in many years, but the last I checked, it wasn't something on their roadmap. So the next thing so to answer that, and then Jeremy's answering in the background, but to answer that question, you need to run some sort of virtual machine on your Mac to have, a Windows setup. And you'll notice, I'm on a Mac right now, but I'm just running this Windows program on it. So the next thing we're going to look at is your external expenses. Now, external expenses in Function Point, I have a short list. Some of our clients have a similar length, and I've seen others where they have hundreds of external expenses. The external expenses need to be mapped to QuickBooks income items for the purpose of billing your client. So any reimbursable expense where you are going to be billing your client should be in Function Point, and they need to be mapped to QB income items for the purpose of going over to QuickBooks as an invoice. They also need to be mapped to cost of goods sold accounts for the purpose of paying the vendor. Now again, any one-to-one match will be automatic, but I don't have a one-to-one match for any of my expenses. So I need to go in and I need to choose a specific cost of goods sold, and I'm just going to choose a generic one just called COGS. And you're going to find your own list of your own expense accounts or QuickBooks COGS accounts when you get in there. And these are accounts. These are not items. So these are your actual cost of goods sold accounts. Save that. And then we have internal expenses. We have your Function Point internal expenses, anything tracked at a unit with a unit cost and a unit billable value that is standard. Usually something you purchase, take inventory on and sell back to your client, or something that you just have a per unit value for, like say website hosting or something like that. And we're just choosing the QuickBooks income items for the purpose of billing our client for these internal expenses. Save that. And we can then jump into taxes. There's a few important things to mention here. One is that you need to make sure that you have this set up correctly, and this is something I see from time to time, is that the Function Point taxes aren't set up, or they're not named appropriately, or they're not set up correctly. If you have taxes where you are that you need to be including on your invoices or expenses, then it's just really important that you're setting those up correctly. If you go into the admin section of Function Point and you go into taxes and tax groups, you should be able to set those up. And then it's important that they are mapped to the appropriate QuickBooks tax codes. And something that's very important is if you have no taxes, you need to be mapping this to a tax exempt or a no tax code. So it can't just be blank. There needs to be something here, something that's a placeholder saying no tax. And then, Jeremy, I think in the last webinar you pointed out where that was in QuickBooks, and maybe when we sync the invoice over, you can point that out again.
Definitely.
So we'll save that as well, and we'll look at the payment terms. Pretty straightforward. In this case, I have exact matches, so they just matched up. And then payment methods, they were close to exact except for some spelling on check. And then a credit card, I'd probably want to go into QuickBooks, and instead of having MasterCard and American Express, I'd want to just have credit, but we'll address that later. Save that, and the integration is now set up, and you're now good to go. But before we actually get into syncing expenses and invoices, I do want to talk about service groups and classes and what the purpose of that is and how you may or may not be able to use that in Function Point. So in the General tab, there's a checkbox here that says Export Service Groups to QB Classes. If we select that, notice that the Service Groups tab pops open, and I can come in here and I can see my FP service group name and the QuickBooks class name. And I actually mapped these out. You'll notice they're not a one-to-one match, and they were all blank earlier. I mapped them out. I probably should have not mapped them so you can see me do it now, but just like before, in any case of a non-exact match, you will need to choose the appropriate class. But this will work for you if you are using class for something that jives with the way Function Point's operating. So for example, I have agency services, digital, and externals, and then of course ignore the test one. So a good example of how you could use class successfully in Function Point is if you are using class to represent perhaps a department in your company, or a certain type of service you provide, or a certain type of revenue, or something like that, where it makes easy and obvious sense to be mapping that class to one of your service groups. So the service groups are the categories under which we have our services and expenses that we're using to create estimates, invoices, and oftentimes they become tasks as well. Now, so if I have digital, and I can map it to digital, and if I have 25 different service groups, I can map them to the appropriate categories for classes. But there are situations where it's not going to work well. An example of that is like industry type. And I started not too long ago, a few months ago, I started Googling, what is class used for in QuickBooks? And I got all these articles that were literally titled, "No one knows how to use classes or what they're for. Here are some suggestions." And because what I've found is that I speak with agencies that are using classes completely different from the last agency I spoke with. Some use it to track industry, some use it to track divisions, others, I'm sure there's more interesting scenarios that I've come across that aren't coming to the top of my mind right now. But some cases don't work all that well. So, for example, if you use classes to designate industry types that you work with, that's difficult because I have agency services. That could be done for a variety of different industries. So we might need to have agency services - hospitality, agency services - food and beverage, agency services - automotive, and so on and so forth. I'd have to have a service group for every single industry that I work with, because each service group can only be mapped to a single class. So I find that most of the time we're able to map the service groups and it makes perfect sense. But other times, like that, say, industry type, that is a bit trickier and oftentimes won't work as well. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the webinar knew exactly what we meant by classes and what the situation is for mapping those. So just important to keep in mind. Jeremy, any comments on that or questions that you think we should address at this time?
No, it's a quiet crowd today. I do want to just kind of point out what kind of Mark was saying. A lot of people ask about different departments and running revenue reports by department. It's the same principle Mark was explaining, that if you want to break the service groups down into classes and you're trying to do this for departmental reporting out of QuickBooks, you will have to create the service group with each department, like some sort of hyphen, department name, and then you have to create all those different services and the services to go with it. Just touching base on that is, it could work, but I would kind of caution individuals that want to run service groups as classes being departments that it may not come over the way you're hoping for it. Worst case scenario is you try it, you run a couple of reports. If it works for you, then great. If it's not, it's something you can easily turn off and not have come over.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create an invoice and sync it. Then we're going to create an expense and sync that. Then we're going to create another invoice and probably sync that too. So let's look at a job that I created meant to be a real-world example, as close as I could possibly get it. So we have a job here. It's for our client, Trees Organic Coffee. And it's the cheesecake promo poster and webpage. It's a coffee shop down the street. They have literally the best cheesecake in the city. It's awesome. So this job is a shout out to Trees Organic Coffee. So we have this job here, and we have an estimated value of $14,575. Let's say that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bill my client for 50% of my digital services and 50% of my agency services. My external expenses, I haven't incurred any yet, so I'm not going to bill them any of that, and we're going to bill that afterwards. We can see a breakdown of what these values are, and notice the services, which are mapped to the income items. And this is the financials tab of the job details page. So what we're going to do is up at the top, we're going to choose to add new invoice. And I'm going to choose for this to be a 50% of estimated value invoice. It's an interim invoice. Select that invoice. And here we have 50% of our estimate. So it automatically calculated 50% of our estimate. But I don't want to bill anything for the photography, so I'm just going to blank that out. And that gives us our invoice, $7,000. I have full control over this. I can put in any custom amounts I want. I can use estimated or actual or remainder values, and I can also see the timesheets and select and deselect those if they did exist. But in this case, we'll say 50% of estimated, not including the expenses. save that. And then up at the top, we have a button that says Post Invoice. And we'll select that, and that's going to put the invoice in a posted status. And this is what tells the system that this is ready to go over into QuickBooks. Now, when you're using, and this is where the difference between QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online comes into play. If you're using QuickBooks Desktop, you're probably going to be posting invoices and expenses as as they occur, and then you're going to sync them at certain time intervals. Maybe the end of every day. I think that's probably a good idea, or maybe every Friday, so the end of every week. Those are kind of the two options I'd recommend. I don't recommend doing it once a month. I'd say once a day or once a week. And the process looks like this for QuickBooks Desktop, and then we'll look at online. So all we're going to do is open up fp.Accountant. We're going to choose to synchronize with FP, and then all of the posted items are going to come over. Now, when we look in QuickBooks here, so I want to watch this happen. We look at our customers, and we go down to T because it's alphabetic, and we're seeing no Trees Organic Coffee, so they don't exist. If they did exist, the system would use them. Since it doesn't exist, it's going to create them. So I'll choose to synchronize with FP, and then as long as we've set this all up correctly, we're going to see Trees Organic Coffee. So there we are. So here's Trees Organic Coffee's popped in, and there's our cheesecake promo poster and web page. So it's brought over the client, and it's brought over the job, and it's brought over the invoice. Now, if the client did exist, it's not going to create a new client. It's going to drop a job and an invoice under the existing client. And then if we take a look at this invoice, let's pop it open here. Notice that I have the items and I have the service. And notice it says description, because the description is not actually bringing over the description from the description field you entered into function point. That could be really long, or a couple words. But the point is, that's not what it's bringing over. What it's bringing over is the service name. So I'm able to see, okay, well, we had project management, twice, one in agency services and one in digital. And there is no income item called project management, so therefore we mapped it to professional fees. This is the item in QuickBooks that it's coming over as, and this is what it was in function point. And this is the class that it's related to. So if if you do have the class syncing, then you're going to see this. If you don't, it'll be blank. And then notice that we have the tax, and this is what I was talking about. You can't have this blank. QuickBooks requires something. So we have E for exempt, I believe, so tax exempt, non-taxable, and that's what's filling in because we have the no tax option in function point synced to the no tax item in QuickBooks, and that's what's causing this to come over correctly. If we had the other taxes, if we had GST, then of course it would have brought over GST and so forth. Jeremy, any questions, comments, concerns, anything on that initial sync we've just done?
Yeah, I've got two kind of chime in things here. Just kind of the way that QuickBooks does the summing of the items, it's based upon each line item, and therefore the tax code is mandatory. That's why we keep saying you need to have at least one tax-exempt tax. QuickBooks, as a processing of the invoices, is going to look at the rate, and then it's going to look at the amount, and then it's going to look at the tax code, and then at the very bottom, it's going to right above the total where it's got 0.00. It's going to take that tax based upon what tax code you have per line and actually fill in the tax amount. And because the requirements of QuickBooks require that you need to have that one tax code, it's part of the formula that they use. It's quite easy to create. You just have to go into your list, and you go to your items list and create a tax item that's 0%, and that will get you the exempt tax.
So just create a new item, and then it would be
the sales tax item there at the very bottom of the drop down there, Mark.
There we go. Yep.
And then just put in 0%. It does ask for a tax agency, so that's who you remit your taxes to. And then you just fill that in. For Canadians, it's usually Ministry of Finance or Receiver General, so we'd fill that in. You'd okay that, and then you'd be able to then create invoices without there needing to be taxes.
Awesome.
And I do want to, a question just came in since we're talking exactly about it. The question is, do you need to set up FP for the no tax? FP automatically creates no tax in the system. It's not something you don't have to create a new tax group in function point that says no tax. It automatically is there just because it is a mandatory requirement.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Mark. I was just wanting to touch base. If you can go back to the invoice in function point just for a moment.
Okay.
We spent the time in the admin section putting the mapping together on the invoice. I just want to touch base, if we can just go to edit the service group for a moment, Mark, is if you decide, for example, account services, it was at one point mapped to account services in the admin section, but for whatever reason on this invoice you want to filter the dollar figure to a different item when it gets into QuickBooks, specifically for this job or this invoice, you can change the drop-down menu for the linkage on the individual invoices at any time, and it will overwrite what you had previously set up in the admin section.
That's a good point. And another thing to mention is that if you have a service in function point that is not mapped, then this is what will happen. When you go to save or when you go to post it, it'll tell you haven't been filled in, and then you'll notice it turned it red. And then we choose the appropriate item and we save it. And then this is out of sync because we've made edits and then submitted it. So let's actually go ahead and do that. I mean, why don't we just, we're here. It's probably a question that's going to come up. Let's just go ahead and change something. So maybe we're actually going to bill the client 60%. So I'm going to change this. We're making an adjustment to the invoice, and we'll save it. And then it's now out of sync. So any adjustments you make is going to put it out of sync. Now I have it open in QuickBooks, and that's not going to work. I need to get out of this invoice. I cannot have it open while we're syncing something that affects it. So in this case, we have Cheesecake promo poster and web page of 7,000, and when we sync this, it's going to change from 7,000 to I can't quite recall exactly what it was in function point, but we'll see that number jump up here in a second. Oh, Jeremy, did I do something wrong there?
No, it looked okay to me. Let me just see what's happening here. If you want to scroll down, it might just be updating it after the fact. Can you go back to the invoicing function point there, Mark? I just want to make sure that the changes did save.
Oh, you know what? Maybe actually, I didn't actually register that. That's my bad. So there we go. I put in the percentage, but I didn't actually adjust the value. So we'll save that, and then it's out of sync. So let's go ahead and let's actually just navigate to it. There we go. So we actually did make a change. The first time we did make a change, I like to make sure I have everything closed, and then we'll sync that, and we should see it update now from 7,000 to that new updated value. There we are. So it went from 7,000 to 8,745 because we're making the adjustment in function point. And that's a really important thing to mention and something that is asked all the time. If you need to make a change, where do I make the change? And the answer is always that you make the change in function point. There's only one thing that you're going to do in QuickBooks related to this whole process, which we're going to show right now, and that is the entering of the payment. So any changes, adjustments, modifications, anything goes into function point. Now, where are you actually going to receive a payment for an invoice? It would make a lot of sense for you, of course, to receive that payment in your accounting system. So in this case, we would open up this invoice, and then we're going to choose to receive a payment on this invoice, and it's going to be check, and we're going to enter a check number, and then it's for the total 8,745. Save and close, save and close. It's now been paid. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a sync, and anytime you run a sync, it's updating the systems. So we've entered a payment in QuickBooks. We're syncing it with function point, and then that payment is going to go back into function point, which we'll see here in just a second. There we go. So if we now look at this invoice, refresh our page, we're going to see that it is exported, and the payment amount is $87.45, paid by check. They paid today, and the balance is 0. So if we navigate to this job and we look at our invoices, we're going to see payment status is paid, balance of 0. Now, that whole concept of syncing with QuickBooks using fp.Accountant, it's this middleware that's controlling it. So you need to decide when you're doing this and why. Again, usually the end of the day, maybe the end of the week, you're going to sync over everything, and it's going to send the invoices over to QuickBooks and bring the payments back into Function Point. But that is a major difference between the online version, and let me show that now. So here I have another system that is hooked up with QuickBooks Online. Now, here I have for Trees Organic Coffee. It's a different system. I have a job called New Entrance Signs, and it's for $2,000. And I'm just going to quickly choose to add a new invoice for 100% of the estimate, which is default. Add invoice, and I have an invoice for $2,000. Now, here's the main difference between the two systems. The other one said post, and then we sync with the middleware. With QuickBooks Online, we just select export invoice. I just set this up before the webinar, so I'm hoping I did it correctly. Looks like I did. So we're just clicking export, and then in QuickBooks, let's see here. There we are. So in QuickBooks, we have Trees Organic Coffee with an invoice of $2,000. And again, this was, you probably noticed that it wasn't there a second ago, and I refreshed, and now it's here. So it's created the company. Here's our invoice. So that, that's really the main difference. The entire back-end integration setup is identical. So notice that we have, product service. This is the income item, the equivalent of the income item, and then we have the description. We have the rate, the quantity, the rate, the amount, the tax situation is the same. So everything is the same. Really the main difference is that there is no post and then sync everything. You're syncing, you're selecting to export the invoices and expenses as they are created. Or another thing that you could do is, if you wanted a bit more of like an approval process, is you could run an expense find or an invoice find and look at the exported status and say, show me everything unposted. And there'll probably be some results in here, I'm not sure. Yeah, there we are. So everything that's unposted. And then we can go in here and choose to export these. Export invoice, export invoice, export invoice, and export them all. If you wanted a bit more of an approval process, you can control who can and cannot take that action. And you may have one individual that does that, once a week or something like that. But I'd say most of the time, people are syncing those right after they create them. Jeremy, before we jump into expenses, anything that you think we should touch on that we haven't covered so far, or any questions?
I just wanted to briefly touch on the last screen that we're at with the the invoice showing as exported. Right beside the export status, you'll notice this new thing that came out about a month ago that says Stop QuickBooks Sync. The logic behind the Stop QuickBooks Sync is that you can stop the integration from pulling that invoice again. And so this is for people that made, they made an invoice, they exported it into QuickBooks, but they don't want to have changes from Function Point then going back into QuickBooks. So let's say, you've got an invoice for $2,000, but you just want to update Function Point and not have the difference. So you change it to $3,000. You don't want that $3,000 to be reflected on the invoice in QuickBooks for whatever reason. You can hit that Stop QuickBooks Sync, and then this invoice then will not sync over the next time you run a sync.
Awesome. Thanks for pointing that out, Jeremy. Okay, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is the entering of an expense. So let's jump to our job here, which we're already on. Let's look at our financials. So notice we're looking at our job, Cheesecake promo poster, and web page. And I have an expense here down at the bottom for photography that is estimated at $500, marked up to $575. We haven't received any invoice from our vendor or created a PO, so there's no actuals in here. But we actually did invoice that $345, because you'll remember I went in and I updated and I put in 60% and I selected everything when we were editing that invoice. But let's go ahead and let's choose to add our photography expense. So I can do that by selecting this button here. I can also do that by, from anywhere in the system, selecting to add expense from the main navigation bar. And if I do that, then instead of the fields being filled in for me, I'll need to select them. So we will choose our supplier. See which ones we got in here. Let's say we're the supplier. Yeah, let's say that. Let's use TRC Printing actually. So choose our supplier, enter reference number. So this is like invoice 945 from our vendor. That we have the memo description. So this is the memo description. Now an important part of this memo description is that when this syncs over to QuickBooks, this cannot be more than 249 characters, I believe. So anything 250 or more, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, is going to cause a problem, and it's going to pick up the description for potentially in the wrong area, not in the wrong area of the system, but in the wrong area of the actual description, and in some cases it can cause issues relating to duplicates and things like that. So it's just important that this is not really meant to be really long description. It's just a memo description that goes into QuickBooks, so it has to be less than 250 characters. And then
Mark, so I just want to touch base on that. The actual memo field in QuickBooks is the limitation. It's the one that only allows 250 characters. If you try to add more than 250 characters, QuickBooks will try to truncate the actual description, and it may not truncate it in the same place each time, so you may end up with duplicate expenses. So it is very, very good, like as Mark said. Plan on doing 249 or less than 250. If you try to do 250, you may get away with it, but then you may end up typing an extra character, and you may have 251, and who wants to spend the time counting the characters every time they type it in? I would just use a short memo, as Mark said, and just if you need to put in any extra details, put it in the description on the actual line item.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that is, it is the line item description. So, you might have multiple line items, and this is, the description of the expense being purchased. And this is what's going to show up everywhere. This is just a memo description for the overall entry of this list. So we're going to choose our job. So I know that I probably don't have many jobs in the system, if at all, other than the one that has the word cheese in it. So I'm just typing cheese, and it fills in for me. If there was more than one result, I'd see a list. And of course, I could select to choose from everything. Choose my service group. So this is going to go against external expenses. Choose my expense type. Notice it's letting me know that I've estimated some value of photography on this job. So I'm going to select that. And notice that the cost of goods sold account filled in automatically based on the expense type. And then putting in our values. So quantity, we'll just say it's 1 at 500. Keep it simple. It's marked up by 15% to 575. We'll save that, and our expense has then been added. So from here, syncing this over to QuickBooks, just like before, the process is the same with the invoice. So we're posting the expense, and then we're going to choose to synchronize with FP. Now, when I look at my vendors here, I think TRC is already in there. So here's TRC printing. There's a bill in there for $1,000, so we should get another one in here for 500. So there, just jump to 500, and we can see here's our INV 945 for $500 entered today, and we can open it up, and you'll notice that here we have the memo description. So see that tiny little box it's going into, and then here we have the description of the expense, and this is like the actual description, the actual important description. So we have the amounts, again the tax situation, and our expenses now in function point in QuickBooks as a bill that's ready to be paid. Jeremy, any comments about that at all?
I just want to kind of go through that reference number again. I know you talked about it when we were doing the quick setup there about the admin section and the different preferences between using a PO number plus reference number, just PO number, or just reference number. A lot of individuals ask, where does the first number part come in when my reference number gets into QuickBooks? I really just want to do a quick search for the reference number. My reference number is not showing me in QuickBooks. Maybe it didn't come over correctly. It's because of the 6 plus the invoice 945. So when you're looking in QuickBooks, if you're doing a quick search for the expense, make sure that you include the PO number with the reference number if you're using that preference. Just because, again, QuickBooks, with their searching preference, it does have to be exact for it to find it. So just keep that in mind if you're using that preference.
Awesome. Thanks for putting that out. I wasn't actually aware of that myself. Okay, so with regards to QuickBooks Online, and it's really an identical situation as before. you're creating it exactly the same way, you're just choosing to export. So, if we were to look at that job, and actually we don't have any expenses estimated on it, we'll just quickly add one. And choose our supplier. I guess we'll choose ourselves. Reference number, INV 905. Again, in our memo description. Job, I think it was 1003. There we are. Choose our category. There's only one. Choose our expense. We'll say photography again. And it looks like that wasn't actually mapped. Oh, let me take a look here. Make sure that that's okay. Oh, the COGS account's what we want.
And since you're at the screen right now, Mark, I do want to touch base. With the online version, it only allows the options to go against an expense account or a COGS account. With the desktop version, you do have the system preference to change it to go against an actual items from your items list. So there is a little bit of a difference on how the expense work from the QuickBooks desktop to the QuickBooks online.
And we're always recommending the cost of goods sold account anyways, right? Like, I think that we kind of discourage that option.
Yeah, I always say, the rule of thumb is always use the expense account or COGS account when you're doing the transaction. At the end of the day, when it gets into QuickBooks, it's going to hit that account anyways. If people are doing specific reports by service reports, they want to figure out, what service is making them the most money or costing them the most. That's the only time I would suggest using items for expenses. Otherwise, I would stick strictly to the chart of accounts, expense accounts.
Okay, sounds good. So you'll notice here that I now have the ability to choose that cost of goods sold. So, just another example of a case where the QuickBooks integration really is driven from that admin section. It's really, really important. And the process, again, is exactly the same as the process we looked at earlier. The only difference is that we are choosing to export the expense. And we're going to get an exported status here. So status exported. And then, I'm going into QuickBooks Online. I might do a bit of a refresh here and then look at my vendors. There we are. Look at my vendors, and then we have function points, and then here's that bill that we just put in for $500. So it's going over when you select export, and that covers the expenses. So I know that we're running up to the end of our time here, so I just want to maybe just jump back just a little bit and into the admin section and just kind of talk about it a little bit more. I'll just show off the fact that if we look at our expense, that you'll notice that it is in a status of exported. So, sorry, Jeremy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out something. A couple of questions have come into why there's an underscore vendor in the vendor name when it comes into QuickBooks.
Okay.
So basically what happened with the older version of the integration, individuals wanted to use the same company as a customer and vendor. And due to the way QuickBooks works, you can't have the same name in two different modules. So let's say you've got TRC Printing. You couldn't use TRC Printing as a customer if you already had them as a vendor. So as a workaround for that, kind of a system suffix is what we put in, is an underscore vendor. Now, you don't necessarily need to have underscore vendor in there. That's just a generic one that we've got in our older systems. By default, it's going to be blank, so it's just going to pull in the company name on the left top corner. If you do plan on using both the company and vendor, you will definitely need to fill in the bottom right corner there where it says QB vendor name optional. You will need to set that to vendor with its name. So let's say it's TRC Printing vendor or TRC Printing something. It's got to be different. It's got to be unique compared to the actual customer name. And just also want to point out, Mark, is the company type. If you're using it for a customer and a vendor, you want to make sure that the company type, though, is, however, is vendor, because if you have the customer type set to client or anything besides vendor, you won't be able to do external expenses against it.
Okay, good point. So the QB customer name, in what situation would you fill that in?
That would be the opposite. So let's say the primary name that you wanted to come over in the top left corner is the actual vendor name. Then you would put in the company name for the customer that's slightly different on the opposite side.
Okay. So just to recap, the QB customer name and QB vendor name are used when you have one company that is both a client and a vendor, so that the system, when it brings it over, when it brings over an expense, it knows to use what it finds here as the vendor name, and then it uses what it finds here as the customer name. Um, and that, or vice versa. It'll use what it finds here as the customer name and then use what it finds here as the vendor name. And that is only applicable if you have one company for which you are considering them both a client and a vendor. And I think, when I'm talking to people about this, usually my first recommendation is to have two entities in function point, just to avoid this entire issue. So we'd have TRC printing client and TRC printing vendor. And we would just have them in the system twice, once as a client, once as a vendor, and then it'll be really straightforward. You shouldn't really hit any issues. Would you recommend that as the default way of going about things?
I would definitely, Mark. Yes.
Okay, great, awesome. Yes, I just want to jump back into the admin section here really quickly. It's so important that you make sure that everything in here is really set up correctly to your liking. That you're going through each of these modules, each of these tabs, and setting things up correctly. And that's when you make changes to your system, you are keeping in mind that you need to do things in the admin section. So if you're adding new services, they need to be mapped. And if they're not mapped, then you're going to get that red bar when you're trying to post an invoice or export an invoice. So it's really important to keep on top of that, because I find that oftentimes when someone will tell me, hey, the QuickBooks integration stopped working, or there was an issue or something like that, you can almost always come back here and just go through the tabs. And like even earlier today, I said to Jeremy, hey Jeremy, my QuickBooks integration is throwing up an error. We got this webinar coming up today. Can you help me figure it out? Because I had actually just set up, like, this isn't a running example. It's one that I created or recreated this morning, and I couldn't figure it out because I was looking at the main tabs, the services tab, and things like that. And then he said, oh, your AR account isn't mapped. And I looked at AR, and sure enough, there wasn't an exact match, and it wasn't there. It was blank. So all I needed to do was just click that drop down. So that even myself, I fall victim to this kind of habit of just not checking every single tab, especially if you're making updates. And if you happen to be an agency that is you want things to be using uniform terminology. It's like you want your function point services to match your QB income items exactly, then you need to be on top of that. So you need to be, if you're creating a new service in function point, you need to be creating the corresponding income item in QuickBooks. And that's not a practice I recommend getting into the habit of. I don't think that you should be needing to do that all the time. Ideally, you'd set it up at the beginning, and then you wouldn't have to create any new services. But of course, that's not always the case. So when that does happen, you just need to make sure that you're coming into the admin section and setting up the integration so that everything is mapped and everything's accurate. And as long as you do that, whether it's the online version or the desktop version, your syncing and your exporting should run pretty smoothly. You shouldn't really have too many issues. So it's really, if there are issues, it's usually back here, some sort of problem with the way that you sync things. So you just, again, keep on top of that, and things will run smoothly for you. Jeremy, any final comments you want to make before we close out the webinar today?
I just want to point out that both the integration for the desktop and online is a subscription service that you do have to subscribe to. It is not something that just comes with function points. So if you've recently signed up or planning to sign up to use the integration, you can either get in touch with support, and we can talk to your account executives to make sure that you've got that on your contracts, and then we can definitely get that set up for you.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The integration with QuickBooks is $49 a month. So that it's one of the two optional features with function point. One is the QuickBooks integration, the other being the integrated client portal. So those are the two optional add-ons of the system. So if you are interested in that and you're not already using it, you're not already subscribed, just let us know. We'll be happy to help you out. So I do want to launch a poll. I think we have most of the people on the webinar that joined in, so I want to launch a poll because it looks like we've only had a couple drop off. So I'm going to launch that now. I was just asking how valuable you found the webinar. So far the responses to this latest cycle of webinars that we've been doing has been very positive. I've seen a couple requests from people, and we're trying to make sure we take your feedback and make changes and adjustments based on what you're looking for. So if you do have any suggestions, comments, feedback that you want to make, any thing that you want to communicate to us, please do feel free to send an email to success@functionpoint.com. Again, that's success@functionpoint.com. Just let us know if you have any thoughts or things that you want to bring to our attention. Then we'll definitely make sure to take those into account and hopefully continue to improve these webinars. The next cycle that is happening, so every 2 weeks from now for the next 8 weeks, is going to be the same cycle that we've been doing. So CRM and estimates, project and task management, invoicing, all styles, and QuickBooks integration. We're going to go through that cycle one more time, and then we're probably going to change it up with some different topics after that. So do keep an eye out, and if you haven't been on the other webinars like the CRM and estimates one and the project management one, I highly recommend that you check them out. And there's some, even if you saw the other earlier ones, you have some time on Wednesday at noon Pacific or 3 Eastern, check it out, and you'll often learn new things that maybe you didn't see the first time. So please feel free to join. And really appreciate your time joining today, and hope that we'll see you on the next webinar in a couple weeks. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you, Jeremy, for your time. And yeah, we'll see you 2 Wednesdays from now, same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you all.